window at the streets just below him. Running east-west was Bronson, and north-south was La Brea. From here, up above the lights, he could see every car crawling along below him. He knew he should sleep now, because he could be here for only a few hours. The construction crew began work at 6 o'clock each morning, but the crane operator always arrived around 5:15, and spent some time walking around with a cup of coffee and talking to people. Carver supposed he talked while he could, because he was alone all day sitting up here. Carver approved of the operator's thinking, and he liked him. The operator had photographs taped in his cab, some of them signed to Mitch, so Carver thought of him as Mitch too. One of the pictures was of a blonde woman, presumably Mitch's wife, and 4 blonde kids who looked a bit like her. There were a few shots of the same kids, one at a time, playing baseball or riding a horse, swimming in a pool behind a suburban house. There were also home-printed digital snapshots of the wife wearing nothing, one on a bed, one sitting on the thick arm of an overstuffed couch, one in a shower. But always she was looking right at Mitch's camera and smiling. Nobody but Mitch ever came up all 250 feet to go in the cab, so Mitch must have thought his cab was as private as the inside of his skull. Carver brought nothing up the ladders each evening but a snack and some water, so he'd had nothing to read but Mitch's manuals. He'd acquired a fairly clear notion of what Mitch did for a living, and had learned how to raise and lower the hook, turn the crane's boom, and a few other operations. He had originally planned that on his last night here, he would move the crane into some odd position and leave it that way. But since he'd started to think of Mitch as a real person, he had become reluctant to give him the creeps. The construction crew always started to pack up at 3:30 in the afternoon, locking up tools and shutting down equipment, and then left at 4 o'clock. Any time after that, Carver could show up, pick the lock on the heavy chain at the front gate, then the other lock that secured the door to the ladder that led up the mast of the tower to the cab. When Carver was 250 feet up in Mitch's tower crane, he considered himself the safest man in Los Angeles. The crane was more important to him tonight than before. Today, Carver had seen some of the men who were hunting for him. They were the ones who nurtured the growing fortune and nasty reputation of Manco Kapak. Carver had been eating lunch at Farmer's Market when he had seen 5 of them moving along a narrow aisle, single file, like a trade delegation from the Republic of Hell. They moved stiffly because the guns they carried under their sport coats or in the waistbands of their pants were uncomfortable and made it hard for them to bend. There they were, stiff-walking through Farmer's Market between the juice bar and the toffee place. They moved up the aisle in a slow, deliberate side-by-side gait, and Carver stayed at his table near the donut counter watching. The front man, one of the red-headed Gaffney brothers, would mutter, "Excuse me," or "behind you," to the people ahead of them in the aisle. Whenever he did it, the person would turn to glance and see the 5 of them coming on. The bystander would be visibly startled, then compress his body against the side of the aisle as though it were a herd of bulls moving past him. Carver knew they were searching for him, and that someone must have seen him at Farmer's Market and rushed to call them. But he was sure now that none of them knew him by sight. They were just relying on tips and descriptions from informers. Carver turned away, got up, and moved up the long narrow aisle between bins of fruit and shops full of jars of hot sauce or cheap luggage. He turned between the L.A. Beverly Hills Hollywood souvenir shop and the chocolate shop to get to the aisle beside the open area where the stalls sold pizza and Chinese pork buns and Mexican tortas, and finally made it to the Cajun gumbo stand, then made a left turn into the corridor that emptied into the parking lot. He made his way quickly onto Fairfax, where people moved in and out of shops that sold Russian souvenirs, while cars blocked the street waiting for parking spaces. He walked a few blocks north, then went in the front door of Cantor's Delicatessen, and out the back door to the alley and on to the next street. Carver backtracked a few blocks south to Wilshire Boulevard, then down Wilshire to the La Brea tar pits. The park was pretty. It was full of people who didn't want to hurt anybody,